All right, welcome to our afternoon session of Is Genesis History. Our focus today is going to be on Ephraim and Manasseh, the two oldest grandsons, or I should say the two oldest sons of Joseph, who I'm going to attempt to prove to you can be identified in the archaeological and especially the epigraphical record. Now, this actually is part 2 of 3. And in a previous session, I offered 1 and 3 together. So this actually fits in the middle of the 3. So there are things that can't be proven to you right now unless you were to have the DVD ahead of time, which you don't. So when you have that in your possession, you can compare that with this. But actually, before we get into Ephraim and Manasseh themselves, I'm going to finish up what I didn't finish in part 3 from that session, which is a little bit more focus on Joseph and Jacob, and especially on Jacob. So we're going to look first at the death of Jacob and the end of phase H at the site of Avaris, which I had attempted to prove beforehand that Avaris is the site where Jacob moved his family in 1876, according to the Bible, during the time of the great famine that was going on in the ancient world. So Jacob's time in Egypt, if you look at the bottom here, is 1876 to 1859. He dies in 1859. That year also happens to be the transition where Sesostris III, the famine pharaoh who had been on the throne since 1878, he brought his son, Amenemhat III, onto the throne with him as a co-regent. And so, as the younger of the two, Amenemhat III took over the main duties of the king in Egypt and did all of the ruling, made all of the decisions, sent out the army, and so forth. So, phase H at the site of Avaris is known as the first occupational phase of the Asiatics there. And what I attempted to do in the previous session was to prove that first Asiatic settlement is to be connected with the Israelites. Not just any Asiatics, but the Israelite people with Jacob and his family. So, looking at the phasing scheme, so Egyptian chronology is this column, and it actually, instead of going top to bottom, it goes bottom to top. So older is at the bottom, newer is at the top. This is Dynasty 10 in Roman numerals, Dynasty 11, Dynasty 12, and that Dynasty 12 is the dynasty where Joseph comes in as the vizier, that again I also attempted to prove. He is early in his career, he's identified as a vizier named Sa-Sobek, according to an inscription found, according to two things. One, an inscription found dating 2 years into the famine, found at Avaris, the site where his father lived, and that inscription focused on an agreement made between the native Egyptians and the Asiatics who were there that I'm claiming to be were Israelites. And I identified on that inscription 2 of the individuals, one being Joseph and the other almost certainly being Jacob, but definitely I'm confident about identifying Joseph as Sa-Sobek. So the other inscription, let's see, what was I going to mention to you? The other inscription with, on an inscription at the end of Joseph's life. So on the first inscription, Joseph, I'm suggesting, is called by 2 names in Egyptian. Sa-Sobek, son of the son of the deity who provides life-giving properties through the Nile River. That's the meaning of that name in Egyptian. And then on that same stela, I'm suggesting he also has the title of, or the name of Hor-Emchat Jr., because it says he's the son of Hor-Emchat Sr. So Hor-Emchat means the king of the gods is at the forefront. And as I tried to argue in that previous session, that reflects Joseph's life perfectly. Joseph was about non-self-exaltation, but about the exaltation of God. Because when he was brought in and told the Pharaoh has had a dream and nobody can interpret it, and we want you to interpret it because we know that you're a man who interprets dreams. What did Joseph say? He said, "It is not in me." Then he said, "The Lord, God, will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." And actually, it's the word that's related to shalom, meaning an answer that will provide peace for you. So Joseph, knowing that he would be interpreting that dream, gave zero credit to himself and his own ability. That's about as selfless as you can get. And he gives all credit to God. So for that reason, I suggested the Egyptians named him the king of the gods is at the forefront. Because he didn't put himself at the forefront, he put the king of the gods at the forefront and everything he did. No, God did this for me. God created this. God established Pharaoh in his throne, etc., etc., etc. So then, sometime later in the career of Joseph, I suggested that the two names, Sasobek and Hor-Emchat, were conflated together into one, which is Sobek-Emchat. And I showed an inscription that comes from the site of Dashur, which I strongly argued was the site where Joseph was buried. And that inscription is a funerary inscription, and on it not only names him, and he's not only identified based on the position of his tomb, which is called a mastaba, as the first vizier under the famine pharaoh, but that that funerary inscription gives a title string which includes the most elite, the titles that you only get if you are right up there in Pharaoh's closest circle. And one of those titles actually is found only on this inscription and never before and never again in all of Egyptian records, which is controller of the entire land. And of course in Genesis 41:41, it almost verbatim describes that Joseph was made to be in control of all of the land of Egypt. So that is this inscription is a reinforcement of what the biblical text says was a title, a function that Joseph received as a gift from Pharaoh for his help in answering that dream. So, all of that being the case, Dynasty 12 is when all of these things happen. That inscription I told you about is this one right here. That's Senwosret III, year 5. That's the Esbet Rushdi Stela that 2 years into the famine was inscribed, and it documents that contract made between the local Egyptians and the Asiatics who were there. And it has to do with the building of a dike, which I explained. Here we are 5 years into the 7-year famine, and the screws are really getting tight now. So because water was in such short supply and the tributaries of the Nile were so dried up, they had to carve out more land to get water to flow to the temple estate of the temple of Amenemhat, the first, the founder of the 12th dynasty. So all of that takes place, during Dynasty 12. And that stela I've been telling you about, the Esbet Rushdi stela, the earlier one, is found actually in R1. So R1 is one of the areas at the town, at the site of Tel El Daba, also known as Avaris, and it was found right in this phase here. And actually, I would move this up slightly and I'd move this down slightly. F1 is where the Asiatics, whom I'm calling the Israelites, settled. So there was a hiatus. You can see from this earlier, there was a hiatus, nobody living there in F1. And then the Israelites just come onto the scene, or the Asiatics that I'm calling Israelites. And they start inhabiting area F1. And their first occupational phase is lowercase d /2, Arabic 2. So D2 is where I'm saying is when Jacob lived there, and then D1 is when Ephraim and Manasseh came to live at the site, which I'll be attempting to prove today. So right here, phase H is the equivalent of stratum D2. So the physical stratum is one thing. Phase H is the time period of stratum D2. They go hand in hand. So if I say one, you can imply the other is connected to it. So that's our time period. And as I was explaining to you, this is area R1, and the temple is here, the temple to Amenemhat I. So they built a temple to the deceased founder of the 12th dynasty and worshipped him as a deity, like it or not. The Pelusiac branch of the Nile, of course, the Nile flows from the south to the north, and it's flowing all along here, and it takes a dip, and it comes through this area at the site of Avaris and passes by. And so the temple is located very close to the Pelusiac branch of the Nile. And so when in that inscription they're saying a dike was built to connect to the temple estate of Amenemhat I, you see physically it matches up with what was written, doesn't it? So you figure they needed to carve out a deeper pathway for the water to be brought into the temple. And the Israelites settled here. This is area F1. And everywhere you see dark black, that's where the excavational team led by Manfred Bitock did some of their digging. This area here, they excavated that for over 40 years and didn't excavate everything that was there. That's how monumental the architecture is. So that's kind of a quick background to get us going. This is an artist's rendition of some of the graves that would be above ground. They're superstructures, above ground graves, because remember, we're at the Nile Delta. We're not off in the desert where you have a water table that's deep down. You have a very shallow water table here. So most of the tombs in this area had to be built in superstructure form, because if you burrow into the ground and try to bury someone down there, the water's going to, tear everything apart. So Bitock, the Austrian chief excavator there, suggests that this is one possibility for how, look, this represents a courtyard. So probably a dwelling house here. Now, in phase H, stratum D2, the most important architectural feature was or is a single house that is typical Levantine architectural style. If you haven't been with me before, the word Levantine, of course, goes back to the word Levant, which comes from the word Lebanon. So the entire Levant consists of ancient Syria, the coastal area of Lebanon or of ancient Phoenicia, and then Canaan below it, which becomes Israel. So this is Levantine architectural style. It's tripartite, which means there are 1, 2, 3 parts to the house. So this is the outline of the house right here. You can see that there were certain amounts of foundational walls that were preserved. Where there wasn't wall preserved, they had to just superimpose where there was wall. So you see the difference between what was found and what had to be reconstructed. And actually, what's fascinating about this is, if you know the architectural style of the Israelites when they live in the land of Israel during the united and divided monarchies, they're known as building what we call 4-roomed houses. That's typical Israelite domestic architecture, the 4-room house. Well, guess what we have here? We have not only the tripartite building, 3-part building from the Levantine architectural style, but we have a 4th section added here. And I'm suggesting this is Jacob's house. So the 4-room house not only is indicative of the Israelites in 800 BC or 850 BC, but was indicative of Jacob 1,000 years earlier in 1850 BC. And that same architectural style never left them. They always took it with them, whether or not they were building houses. And obviously there were times when they were living in tents, right? They weren't building houses. But somehow they seem not to have lost their understanding of the architectural design that became part of them once they moved, especially to the land of Canaan. Because that's where Jacob would have adopted it. It was the local architectural style. And then he took it with him down to Egypt. So since they lived at Bethel before this, almost undoubtedly you would have seen this exact type of house at Bethel where they lived before they went off into Egypt. And it's my hope someday to excavate the site that I believe to be the correct site for Bethel, and I hope to find the actual precursor to this house, which would have been Jacob's house before he ever moved to Egypt. So we'll see what happens there. So this represents a wall that's an extension connected to the house, probably supplying a courtyard here, whether that's for children to roam or animals to graze or, just to let off steam and run around, whatever the case is, that was part of the design. Then, now let's move forward in time. Remember, Jacob was there 1876 to 1859, and I would suggest to you that when Jacob died, in the year he died, that when you read the story in the biblical text, and it says that, okay, when Jacob was dying, and Joseph brought his two eldest sons, Manessah and Ephraim, down to visit his father, Adavaris, and Jacob blessed them, that at that time, Jacob said something very interesting to Joseph. He said, and to paraphrase, he said, "Ephraim and Manessah are mine. As for the rest of your sons and your other children, they're yours, Joseph, but these two are mine." And I used to think that's like a plaque on the wall, and all the significance it has is that, 1,000 years later, it's going to be, the divisions of the land of Canaan, according to the tribes, is going to reflect this statement of Jacob. But it's way more than this, folks. Jacob was literally physically yanking Ephraim and Manessah away from their father and saying, the boys are going to live here with their uncles. This was a stroke of genius. And Jacob has not received the credit he deserves until now, because this changed history. He knew that the sons of Joseph, who were born and raised in Egypt by an Egyptian mother, who was the daughter of the priestess of On, which is Heliopolis, that she would have built into them Egyptian culture. They would have been raised with all of the amenities of the second in command in all of Egypt, because Joseph is a vizier. And they would have known Egyptian language and script and Egyptian measurements and architectural design and everything, lock, stock, and barrel. They would have been Egyptian in and out. And Jacob saw that, and he knew it, and he said, for my people to survive here, they need to Egyptianize. So his way of doing that was to bring Ephraim and Manessah to the homestead, and they lived there. So what happened was, right on top of the place where that previous tripartite house was built, that I'm saying was Jacob's, was an unbelievably massive estate built. Nothing like it in all of Egypt. When the archaeology, and then again, 40 years they excavated this, and they never finished. They first called this a palace when they got to it, because it was of such grand scale. This is only what a king would have. But what do you have to have for this to be a palace? What's the one thing you've got to have if it's a palace? Don't be shy.
A king.
A king, true. True, a king. But architecturally, what do you have to have? A throne room. A king has to rule from somewhere, right? No throne room, no palace. There's no palace here. You know what there is instead? Twin master bedrooms. Is that not amazing? So probably Ephraim and Manessah, they show up on the site. Their grandfather tells them, guess what, like it or not, you get to live here. And he dies in that same year. They go and bury him. And then Ephraim and Manessah come back. Probably they went on the procession too, to Canaan to bury Jacob. They came back and they look around and they say, we need a little bit of redecoration here. So they took Jacob's old home and they probably leveled it, and right over top of it they built their bedrooms, their master bedrooms. And then they just built and built and built and built as they needed to turn this into a colossal estate. And if you look at this, so remember that tripartite building that is basically a 4-room house? There it is in red. See the twin bedrooms built right over? That's, it looks like the red was built over top, but trust me, it's underneath. So that is the hub then of this entire estate. So we go back and we look, and it's right here. This little square. Okay, the tripartite building was of good size. It was considerable in its size. But it's dwarfed by this entire estate that was built. That becomes Ephraim and Manasseh's home. So, now I want to show you a couple things that were found there that are really interesting. One of them being this duckbill axe. Can you see why it's called a duckbill axe? Looks like it has 2 eyes and, a duck's, what do we call this? Beak. A duck's beak. And this is looking at it from above. This is looking at it from the side. So this duckbill axe was found there. Well, guess what? The duckbill axe is only indicative of the Middle Bronze 2A phase, a certain window of time. And so that helps date, it's not the only thing that dates here, it helps date the first occupational phase, the phase of Jacob. So, let's see. So here is from the tombs at Beni Hassan is this drawing, and you can see the duckbill axe right there, and you can see the ovular marks there where there were holes. And so this is a person carrying that duckbill axe. So it's understood in Egypt that Asiatics came in and they brought their axe with them. What I did is I purchased an authentic Canaanite duckbill axe, and I had my uncle, who's a master with woodworking, make for me my own duckbill axe, like was owned by probably one of the sons of Jacob and was buried with it. It was found in the burial of, again, probably one of Joseph's brothers. And it's funny because I had always looked at this picture and I said, why in the world is he holding the axe there? That makes no sense. But then when my uncle made this for me, I just did this and I found out, well, guess what? That's why he's holding it there. That's the center of gravity, isn't it? So it makes sense for him to hold it right like this. Now, just for fun, I checked the profile of the actual duckbill axe, this one, that was found at the site. I checked it against the typology of axes, of duckbill axes. And I found that there were several that were the closest parallels to it. One at Safed, one at Shamir, and then one unknown. Even though here it doesn't look so much similar, the profile this way, top to bottom, does. So those 3 sites are located here, here, and here. So somewhere between this area is probably where the axe maker made the axe that ended up in the possession of one of Jacob's sons at Avaris. And then, before we move on to this tool, and there's a debate as to whether that's a tool or a weapon. My money is on tool. That is not an effective weapon to use. Now maybe if somebody is attacking you and it's all you have in your hand, it becomes a weapon. But that's not its intended design. So, but some archaeologists use this argument that it's a weapon to suggest that these were warriors who were buried there. That's not a warrior's burial goods. That's a tool. So also found at the site of Avaris were several fragments of a large statue, the most conspicuous, the most impressive, being this sculpted head of an Asiatic man with, and I'm going to butcher the French, I know, so if you speak French, then correct me later, in the shape of a mushroom coiffure. And that was very indicative of the hairstyle of Asiatics at the time. So that's why we know this is an Asiatic. And you can see that it was destroyed, whether by, by accident or purposefully. And so this head was found in tomb number F1, that's our area, P19, grave 1. And different fragments were found elsewhere. This fragment of the shoulder shows some of the original color. So you see black here, you see red here, let's see, and white, of course. So this is an artist's reconstruction of what it would have looked like. So when you read about Joseph's cloak of many colors, 99.9 with a bar over it % chance, it looked exactly like this. It didn't have necessarily 58 colors to it like we like to design, right? We really take this thing and run with it, but probably it wasn't that exciting. So, then, I don't know how much of importance this is to you, but there are connections between Avaris. Remember, this is a reconstruction of the original statue as it would have stood, with fragments found here, 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 and here, and here. And so that's found at Avaris. This is also found at Avaris. Men with kilts, believe it or not. And here this man has a shepherd's crook, which of course the Egyptians really weren't shepherds, were they? But the Israelites were. They had flocks of sheep and goats. So this ceiling, 8314, comes from Tel el-Dabah. That's the Arabic name for Avaris. And it's dated to around 1750 BC or earlier, according to the archaeologists. And of course, that fits perfectly, the earlier fits perfectly with what I've been suggesting to you chronologically. And those kilts are matched on some inscriptions from Serbit el-Khadim, which I showed in the previous presentation. That is a site down in the Sinai where the Egyptians sent teams to exploit the turquoise that was there, because this could become a lucrative industry for them, and they made money on it, right? And, the Hebrew people have been very good at making money and starting industries from the greatest of antiquity until now. So they are very industrious people. So the kilts found on the drawings from Sinai demonstrate that these people came from Egypt. And I would argue even more specifically they came from Avaris. There's a donkey right there that's connected to this drawing. And of course, in some of the tombs that were found of the second Asiatic occupational phase, D1, stratum D1, those tombs included not only burials of humans, but connected to them, burials of their animals. And those animals consisted of 3 types. Wouldn't you know? Donkeys, sheep, and goats. So it all matches very nicely. Now, an Egyptologist, a non-Christian Egyptologist named David Roll, has anybody heard of the name? Okay. He has suggested that this statue is a statue of Joseph. Now, he's right about the time period. Joseph is alive at this time, but he's not done enough careful research to demonstrate what is a much more plausible understanding of all the evidence. If you look at the fragment of the inscription that came from this statue, it features the word Sennecher right there. Well, Sennecher means incense. The word incense appears on a Chetepti Nesu funerary inscription of a person living in Egypt. So this signals death. Someone has died and a statue was made to honor that person. But a study was done by a fantastic German Egyptologist named Dorothea Arnold, who has been living in the United States for decades and just recently retired from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, I believe. And she has proven that the statuary style of the fragments that come from this from this statue are all perfectly in harmony with the statuary that came from a facility that was the chief statuary producing facility during the reign of Amenemhat III, which he came onto the throne in 1859, the very year that Jacob died. Well, Amenemhat III died long before Joseph died. So Joseph was still alive all the way through Amenemhat III's life and continued to live beyond him. So Joseph never died during the reign of the king who produced this kind of statuary. The only thing that makes sense is that this is Jacob's statue here. So the statue makes perfect sense with Jacob because Jacob wasn't buried anywhere at Avaris, was he? It says that he was taken up into Canaan and buried there. So the statue probably much more so reflects that which was constructed to honor the patriarch who brought all of the sons of Israel into Egypt, who is Jacob himself. All right, now we're going to look full bore at the lives of Ephraim and Manasseh, and I'm going to try to prove to you their involvement here at Avaris in the second occupational phase. So 1859, you know that, Jacob dies, and we have this transition. Sesostris III brings his son, Amenemhat III, onto the throne. Sesostris III goes into semi-retirement to the south, upstream, uphill, to the site of South Abydos, if you're interested in knowing where it was. Then, 17 years later, pops onto the scene an inscription, once again down at Serbit El Khadim in Sinai, where the turquoise mining was going on, these annual expeditions to extract turquoise. Sinai 115, which offers for us the first proto-consonantal Hebrew letter. The first, the oldest attested letter of an alphabet. Now, of course, cuneiform writing comes from southern Mesopotamia. That's the oldest. That dates back to Jemdet Nasr period in Mesopotamian archaeology. Second oldest is hieroglyphic Egyptian. That dates to Dynasty 1. That's the earliest attested form we have of it. That's at the time the monarchy was just being established in Egypt. So 1842 is during the 12th dynasty. Amenemhat III is on the throne, and he'd been on the throne for 17 plus years now when it is attested. So Sesostris II is the abundance pharaoh, Sesostris III the famine pharaoh, Amenemhat III the pharaoh whose rule began when Jacob died. So now we're going to move out of phase D2, stratum D2, and we're going to look at stratum D1, the second Asiatic occupational level that I'm connecting to Ephraim and Manasseh. Well, relevant biblical passages. Look at Genesis 47 and then a part of 48. It says this: So Joseph settled his father and his brothers, and he gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, and the best of the land in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Now Israel, that's Jacob, lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it and were fruitful and became very numerous. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and that's why we suggest that he died at the time of 1859. Now it came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Take note, your father is sick." So he took his two sons, Manessah and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Look, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel, that is Jacob, collected his strength and he sat up in the bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, verses 3 through 6 of chapter 48, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me. And he said to me, 'You see, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples. And I will give this land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession. Now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine.'" Here it is. "Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. But your offspring that have been born after them will be yours. They will be called by the names of their brother." So now we're returning to Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh will be called by the names of their brothers in their inheritance. So they receive double portion. They're brought up to Joseph's level, the two oldest sons of Jacob. Well, the house that was occupied by Ephraim and Manasseh, so I probably didn't show you this on a map, but Avaris is located here where the red dot is. So you come down through the, along the Great Trunk Road, and when you hit Wadi El Arish, that's this wadi here, it becomes Egyptian territory. It turns into the way of Horus, Horus being the king of the gods, and that road ends at Avaris, of all places. So the Israelites were perfectly positioned for all of the lucrative industries that would be working their way into Egypt through the site of Avaris. And this is Lahoun, where Joseph, I suggest, moved to immediately after he was exalted in Egypt much earlier. Sirbit El Khadim that I referred to in Sinai, it's located here. So you can see it's a long distance to take a donkey-led caravan all the way down from Avaris into deep into Sinai, down to the site of Sirbit El Khadim. Okay, so now we want to look at a tomb. This is the tomb of one of the people who lived in that second occupational phase that's connected to all of this massive monumental architecture. That's all in Egyptian architectural, not only design, but measurements. They measured everything according to Egyptian standard in that second occupational phase. That is an innovation there, undoubtedly introduced by Ephraim and Manasseh and the builders, the Egyptian builders they would have brought with them. Even the Egyptian plumb bobs that were used were found by the excavators. So they were still doing work on the additions to this building when, the end of the occupational phase came about for whatever reason. So not only do we have a monumental architecture that represents where people lived, but we have a necropolis, or an area for the tombs. So one of the tombs is located right here, tomb number 3. And you can see, let's see, that's not a tomb there. But you can see that this is the largest tomb in the area, isn't it? That's smaller, 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 smaller. This is the biggest tomb. So this is a big shot, right? Well, this is a close-up of grave 3, and so the excavators are writing in German. You see Grab 1, 2, 3. So that's grave 3. And you can see not only the burials of the humans, but the burials of the animals. So this is an artist's rendition with the superstructure having collapsed, so there would have been a ceiling like we have here. And imagine that for whatever reason the ceiling just collapsed down, and that's how they found it. Then when they removed the all that fell from the ceiling area or from the walls, then they could see the various positions where bodies were located. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention to you that we have 5 sheep and goat burials here and 3 donkeys, such as that donkey right there and this goat right here. So in red is the burial of the main person, most important person who occupied this tomb. And we're going to do a close-up now on his grave area. And here it is. This is his body. You see some of his bones. And then you see other implements, such as number 14, right there. The bronze narrow-bladed axe. That's this. So this is an authentic narrow-bladed axe from Canaan. Not from Egypt, but from Canaan. So this man was buried with this exact tool. Obviously a different, a shaft of its day. This is modern, but this is authentic, and he would have been buried with this tool in his possession. It was found right against his femur. And I'll let you take a look at that. But for our purposes, we want to focus in on number 3, which is right here. Number 3, and you can see all of the grave goods show that this guy had lots of money. Silver bracelet, alabaster jar, possibly a silver socketed javelin, a dressed dagger with bronze alloy and gold, So all of this represents great wealth. Well, number 3 is an amethyst scarab and golden ring. And here is a picture of it for you to see. You can notice that the face of it, of course, is flat. It's, you know, it's scraped flat and then drawn on with hieroglyphics. And this portion here was broken off. This is gold around here, so it was worn as some type of ring for him to be able to impress his, not as like, you know, impress his mother, but to press on soft clay, wet clay, to make his seal, so that a document could be official or whatever. So this was his mark. This showed that he was who he was. And the reading of this is Chaka en Rechenu di Sobek Emchat. Does that impress you? Yes. See, I thought it would. It means the ruler of Rechenu di Sobek Emchat. I forgot to show you Rechenu in that earlier map, but Rechenu is the name, the title that the Egyptians assigned to the area of the Levant and to the people from there. They were called Rechenu people. So this ruler is not, okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean where he's ruling, but his derivation. He's not a ruler who is a native Egyptian. He's a ruler who came ultimately through derivation from the Levant. And his name is Di Sobek Emchat. So we want to come back to that in a little bit. There are all the hieroglyphs and all of the sounds that go with them. But the meaning of it is he whom, so the deceased person was named, he whom Sobek Emchat had appointed. And again, his title is the ruler of Rechenu, which makes him the mayor. He's in charge of that whole city. So he has the highest position there. He's the big shot. So we want to know, wow, if his name means he whom Sobek Emchat appointed, then whoever Sobek Emchat is, this guy must be a really, really big shot. Right? So let's hold that thought. And I want to compare this, which we just looked at, from Avaris, this amethyst signet scarab, with one of the images that comes from Serebit El Khadim. Remember I told you about the donkeys? And there's a young boy this side, and there's a young man older, actually, this side. And his name is Chekbi, and his title is his attendant. Whose attendant? This guy's attendant. His name is Chebeded. Chebeded, in Egyptian, and it took me a long time to figure this out, folks, even though Middle Egyptian was the first minor of my PhD. Chebeded is a passive participle. Okay? And he's named that right here. Chebeded, and there's an M here. It's actually Chebeded M here, but that is what's known as mimation, which is the optional addition of an M sound at the end, especially of nouns, in some Semitic languages, including Hebrew. So in other inscriptions, the M is not there, and he's just called Chebeded. So we're calling him Chebeded. His name means, what? His name means, perfect passive participle. He who was disfavored. He who was disfavored. Now, do you remember the story with Jacob receiving Ephraim and Manasseh? Joseph carefully brings his two oldest sons to his father in such a way that he positions Manasseh, the older one, to be by the right hand of Jacob, so that Jacob will reach his hands and go like this and bless them, and the older gets the better blessing, right? It's all about the birthright blessing. So Jacob, he watches Joseph do this. He reaches out his hands, and what does he do? This. And he puts the greater blessing on the younger child. And Joseph gets all bent out of shape. And he says, "You can't do that, Dad. You're making a great blunder here. This one's the older one." And Jacob says to him, "Yes, my son, he will be great, but his brother will be greater." It was Manasseh Ephraim, now it's Ephraim Manasseh. What does this mean? He who was disfavored. When would you get that name in life? When you're born? No. In fact, in the ancient world, you never get almost never get a name when you're born. You get a name when something distinguishes you as connected to that. So disfavor has to come at a time when you're able to receive favor or have favor, and maybe it's taken away from you. So this then becomes the perfect connection with which son of Joseph? Manasseh. Now, you should be saying, well, skeptically, that's not enough to convince me. And I would say, you're exactly right. Don't move out of your seat. Well, so Serebet el-Khadim, where we have these mining expeditions, as I said, is located right here in Sinai, kind of southwest of central Sinai. This is an artist's reconstruction of what it looked like there, a drawing of it with some of the buildings. So Middle Kingdom section, that's Joseph's day. New Kingdom section, and these are temples and rooms, additions built onto the temple that's there. And Hathor is the patron goddess here. And these were built on during the New Kingdom, and that, of course, is the time period of Moses. Well, this is what it looks like. You see that? Dust, away, palm trees, stone. This is desolation here. So it's not a great job for Manasseh. If he could apply to every job he could in the newspaper and the classifieds, this is not the place that he would apply to first, second, or third. But he gets the job. And so he's a honcho in the expedition every year that he goes down, and he's the one who erects these or composes these stelae, these 8 to 9 foot inscriptions that are found here at Serebit. From the New Testament time, this is mine N. You can see as they bore their way inside the chamber and make a chamber out of this, this is where they're hunting for the turquoise. And you can see that they have to have pillars, maintain pillars there that would keep the whole thing from collapsing under its own weight. So they have to leave those as they go. And as I said, there are 8 to 9 foot tall stelae all over the place there, virtually every one of which represents a campaign of a certain year. So Sinai 115 is this one, this first one. And down here is that drawing of the man sitting on the donkey. Right there, you see it? Right there. And there's the boy, and there's the young man right there. So that's Sinai 115. This is Sinai 112, this picture. But I want to give you a feel for the bottom of the stela. So it's Middle Egyptian text inscribed right to left, going down from top to bottom. The text ends here. No, the text ends here. And then there's this line going across to separate the drawing from the narrative story about that year's campaign. And then this, and all the time, Chebeded draws these. Every year he comes and inscribes a new stela. He inscribes a caption. And the caption always changes. What else changes? The height. Now you can't really see the boy here, but the height of the boy here always changes as well. The height of this guy always stays the same, and his name even changes. Only one time on an inscription is this boy named. So this is Sinai 112, brother of the ruler of Rechenu, Chebededem. So that gives us the title of the brother of the ruler of Rechenu and his name, Chebeded. Now, who is greater, the ruler of Rechenu, who is at Avaris, right, or the brother of the ruler of Rechenu? Those are two titles. Which one would be higher? The ruler, because the brother only has his office subordinate in relation to the ruler. So who gets the dirty job going down to Sinai? The brother. The ruler of Rechenu, he sits back in a chair like this with his feet up right here on his desk, cigar smoking, air conditioner flowing, enjoying himself at the homestead in Avaris. That's the good life, folks. We all need to be the ruler of Rechenu. Now, notice the height of the young man. You see where it is? Right to the eye of the donkey? Watch this. Where is it now? Different inscription. He's taller. Here's where this guy receives a name. Do you know what his name is? Can you read it? Nobody? You didn't study Middle Egyptian? Where you been? What happened to you in university? Sh-ka-am. That, believe it or not, is an owl. It's a terribly preserved owl, but sh-ka-am. Shechem. 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 That's a Semitic name. That's not an Egyptian name. Well, we already talked about this. So here's what it means. Shechem, that's the transliteration in Egyptian. Shechem is the name. Well, if you look up in Joshua 17:2, you will find the names of the sons of Manasseh. Did you know what is one of the names of the sons of Manasseh? Shechem. Wow. There it is right there. She-e-k-e-m. Shechem. All that's different is one vowel, and there's 1,000 reasons why that vowel may be different. That means nothing. There he is, right there. He becomes the tent peg for everything to tie the connections down, the synchronisms down perfectly. The son of Manasseh, Shechem. Just as Manasseh had a son, Shechem, here's Shechem. Just as Manasseh had favor taken away from him, Chebeded is the man whose name means he who was disfavored. And there is Joshua 17:2 to confirm that. So that leaves us with the question, who is Sobek Emchat? Actually, not only that, but who is the Sobek Emchat? He who was appointed by Sobek Emchat. Well, to answer that, you have to answer who is Sobek Emchat. And what I showed in the other presentation is that Sobek Emchat is the name of the first vizier under Sesostris III, whom I determined 15 to 20 years ago determined was the famine pharaoh. But only in recent years was I able to see this connection. So Sobek Emchat is the vizier under Sesostris III, who then appoints the Sobek Emchat, his son. So it's Joseph appointing his son Ephraim as the ruler of retinue to oversee the entire city of Avaris as the ruler. And sure enough, this is a fulfillment of Jacob's pledge, Jacob's pronouncement that the younger brother will exceed his older brother. And the older brother gets sent on this dirty job down into Sinai. Make sense?
But Joseph made that appointment, so he really fulfilled Jacob's.
Sure. Sure, exactly. And he had the right, because on the Esbet Rushdie Stela, from 5 years into the famine, it says that the person who is responsible for this inscription was the controller of the city. That's what the title he was given, the controller of the city. So it was Joseph's city in the beginning as Sasobek, the two names, Sasobek and Horemchat Jr. So Joseph at that time was the ruler of the city, but then he gave the keys to Ephraim, the keys to the car, which of course, you know, when you're the 16-year-old and you get the keys to the car, I'm hopping in and I'm driving, right? And that's what Ephraim would have done. And he lived out his life there and he was buried with all of his grave goods. Make sense? Okay? So there you have it. That's archaeological evidence to confirm the historical record of the biblical text related to Jacob, Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. Nice? Okay, thank you.